You ever walk into a place you built with your own two hands, your blood, sweat, and sleepless nights, and feel like you don't belong? Not because you're out of place, but because someone decided you weren't worth seeing. That's what happened to Marcus Reynolds, and trust me, it wasn't just personal. It started on a crisp Thursday afternoon in Atlanta, the kind of day where the sky's too blue and the air's too clean for anything to go wrong. But Marcus Reynolds, 52 years old, founder and CEO of the Reynolds Group, a multi-billion-dollar luxury hospitality empire, had a reason to be uneasy. He wasn't here for a ribbon cutting, a press tour, or a meeting with investors. He came alone, unannounced, and dressed like any regular guest. Jeans, a plain jacket, and an old baseball cap pulled low. No entourage, no limo, no spotlight. This wasn't about making an impression. It was about finding the truth. For the past 6 months, Marcus had received more than a few complaints about the Crown at Midtown, one of his most successful five-star hotels. And not just typical guest gripes about late check-ins or room service delays. These were deeper, more troubling. Guests, mostly Black, Latino, and other people of color, had reported cold welcomes, mysterious booking issues, and feeling like they didn't belong. The reports had a pattern: different guests, same front desk, same dismissive tone, same vibe of, "You're lucky we let you in." Marcus had read each one personally, and while he could have sent in a corporate investigator or called the general manager for a sit-down, he didn't, because Marcus had been in those shoes before. Judged on sight, dismissed with a smile. He knew what it felt like to be invisible in plain sight. So he decided to see it for himself. As he walked through the hotel's double-glass doors, no one looked twice. He paused for a moment in the lobby, a place he designed down to the marble patterns on the floor and the gold trim on the pillars. A place where rooms went for $600 a night, where guests were promised royal treatment. Yet the irony wasn't lost on him. Standing here, he felt more like a trespasser than the man whose name was etched into the cornerstone plaque by the elevators. The front desk was staffed by a young white woman, nose deep in her phone, not even pretending to care. Marcus approached slowly, watching, noting every detail. Her name tag said, "Becky." She didn't glance up, didn't greet him, didn't even flinch as he cleared his throat and stood there for a full minute. That's when Marcus knew. This wasn't going to be a routine check-in. This was going to be an exposure, a reckoning. And by the end of it, someone was going to remember exactly who Marcus Reynolds was. Not just the man behind the empire, but the man who never forgot where he came from and what he refuses to tolerate in the house he built. Becky finally looked up, slow and uninterested, like Marcus had just interrupted the most important Instagram scroll of her life. Her eyes skimmed him, baseball cap, travel bag slung over his shoulder, dark skin, middle-aged, and just like that, she made her judgment. No smile, no "welcome to the Crown," no eye contact, just a flat indifferent. "Yeah?" Marcus kept his tone calm. "I have a reservation. Marcus Reynolds." Becky didn't even blink. She turned lazily to her computer, tapped a few keys with all the energy of someone being forced to work overtime on a holiday, then shrugged. "Don't see it." Marcus raised a brow. "You sure?" "I just checked," she said, not looking at him, fingers already back on her phone, like that was the end of the conversation. But Marcus knew better. This wasn't a glitch. This was something else entirely. Still, he played along, pulling out his phone. "Here's the confirmation," he said, holding the screen up. Clear as day. Marcus Reynolds, Deluxe King. One night, paid in full. Becky barely glanced at it. "Yeah, well, the system doesn't lie." Marcus held back a sigh. Neither does the email. She let out a long, theatrical sigh, like she was doing him a favor just by existing. "Look, maybe you booked the wrong hotel. There's another Reynolds property near the airport. That happens all the time. Marcus looked her dead in the eye. I didn't book the wrong hotel. Becky gave a tight, patronizing little smirk. It's an easy mistake to make. That was it. Right there. That look, that tone, that assumption wrapped in a sugar-coated lie. Marcus had seen it too many times to count. The unspoken message, you don't belong here. Not in this lobby, not in this hotel, not in this world of white tablecloths and rooftop spares. But what Becky didn't know was that the man she was trying to brush off was the one who owned this place, the same man who designed the layout, chose the linens, and interviewed the architect who'd built the damn fountain in the courtyard. Still, he didn't explode. That wasn't his way. Instead, Marcus reached for his second phone, the one linked directly to the company's internal booking system. He logged in, entered his credentials, and found the reservation in seconds. Confirmed. Then he dug deeper, checked the activity log, and there it was. Deleted. User, Becky H. Time, 7 minutes ago. She hadn't just failed to find it. She had erased it. Marcus stared at the screen for a moment, feeling that slow, familiar burn rise in his chest. This wasn't incompetence. This was personal. She took one look at him and decided he didn't belong. Not based on behavior, not based on anything real. Just skin color, age, and assumptions. She thought he was a nobody, and in her mind, nobodies didn't deserve rooms in places like this. Marcus inhaled slowly, staring at Becky like he was studying a problem he'd already solved. She was back on her phone now, thumbing through whatever distraction helped her avoid doing her job, or maybe just avoid dealing with people like him. He stepped forward, calm and steady. Tell me something, Becky. She didn't look up. What happens when you delete a reservation? She blinked, finally glancing his way. It just removes it from the system. Why? And who can do that? Becky shrugged, clearly annoyed. Only front desk staff. Like me. Why? Marcus didn't say a word. Instead, he turned his second phone around, screen facing her. Right there, in bold system font, was the record. Reservation deleted. User, Becky H. Her face drained of color. She looked at the screen, then at him, then back again. Her mouth opened like she might say something, but nothing came out. He leaned in just a little, voice low but sharp as glass. So tell me again, Becky, why did you delete my reservation? She stammered. I didn't. That's not, I didn't mean to. Don't, Marcus cut her off. Don't insult my intelligence. Her hands fidgeted near the keyboard like she could somehow undo the damage if she just clicked fast enough. But there was no back button for this. I have your name, Marcus said flatly. I have the log. I have the timestamp. She looked like she might cry, but Marcus didn't flinch. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't going to let this slide either. You had a choice, he continued. You saw me walk in. You had my name. You had my reservation, and you chose to delete it. She tried again, barely above a whisper. It was a mistake. No, Marcus said, his voice firmer now. A mistake is pressing the wrong button. A mistake is forgetting to greet someone. What you did, that was a decision. You decided I didn't belong here. Silence fell heavy between them. The other front desk staff were still pretending not to notice, but the air had shifted. A couple on the lounge sofa had stopped talking. The bellhop near the elevators was standing a little too still. Marcus could feel the eyes. He didn't care. He picked up the room key card she'd tried to hand him earlier, glanced at the number, 1427. The worst room in the building, right next to the elevators. View of the loading dock. Classic passive aggression. He dropped the key back on the counter like it was trash. Nice try. Becky stood frozen, fingers trembling slightly. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said. You're going to find me a real room, right now, one that matches what I paid for, and you're going to do it correctly." She didn't argue this time, just nodded shakily and tapped into the system. The screen clicked and refreshed. "Room 1912, she said, voice barely audible. Marcus nodded. "Better." But the truth was, this wasn't just about a room. It was about who got to decide who belongs and what happens when they're finally called out. As Marcus stepped into the elevator with the new keycard in hand, his reflection stared back at him from the polished chrome doors. Calm, composed, but under the surface, he was boiling. This wasn't just about Becky anymore. This was a symptom, a warning sign. And Marcus Reynolds wasn't the kind of man who ignored warnings. Once inside his suite, room 1912, exactly the kind of luxury his guests paid for, he opened his laptop, connected to the secure company server, and began digging. First, he pulled up the guest complaint logs for the Crown at Midtown. The list loaded slowly, but when it did, it lit up like a crime scene. There were over 30 flagged complaints in the past 90 days alone, far above the chain's average. Marcus clicked through them one by one. Front desk staff ignored me and took the next guest instead. Felt like I was being judged the moment I walked in. Was told the hotel was full, but then watched a white couple check in minutes later. Employee refused to help me with my bags, said it wasn't their job. Marcus paused. Most of these complaints came from Black and Latino guests. He recognized the patterns: subtle slights, passive-aggressive tones, service inconsistencies, the kind of discrimination that never made headlines but wore people down, one encounter at a time. Then he cross-referenced the names mentioned in the reports. Becky's popped up over a dozen times. Becky refused to check me in, even though I had a confirmed reservation. Becky said I must have booked the wrong location twice. Becky was rude, dismissive, and treated me like I didn't belong. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern. Marcus leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. Becky hadn't just had a bad day. She had made a habit of targeting certain guests, and worse, she'd gotten away with it. But Becky wasn't the only name that stood out. A few complaints had escalated to the hotel manager, David Whitmore. Each time the result was the same: a quick dismissal, a copy-paste apology, and a closed case. Marcus opened David's internal notes. Guest was likely overreacting. No evidence found. Employee denies any wrongdoing. He stared at the screen in disbelief. David hadn't just ignored the signs, he'd covered them up. Marcus pulled up employee performance logs. Becky had been written up 3 times in 2 years. One for inappropriate tone with a guest, one for failure to follow protocol, and one for a misunderstanding involving a reservation cancellation. That last one? 2 months ago. Same story. Different guest. Same result. She should have been fired months ago. But David had let it slide. Marcus closed his laptop and stood up slowly, the weight of what he'd just confirmed settling in his chest. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a culture, allowed to fester under weak leadership and quiet indifference. And now it was up to him to rip it out by the root. Marcus didn't waste time. He left the suite with a calm, deliberate pace that masked the storm building beneath his composed exterior. When he stepped back into the lobby, Becky was still behind the front desk, pretending nothing had happened. Eyes on her phone, posture relaxed, like she hadn't just been caught deleting the reservation of the man who signed her paycheck. He didn't stop, didn't speak, just walked straight past her toward the frosted glass door that led to the manager's office. He pushed it open without knocking. David Whitmore looked up, startled. Middle-aged, thinning hair, shirt untucked beneath a crumpled blazer. The kind of man who built a career on saying yes and avoiding confrontation at all costs. "Mr. Reynolds," he stammered, rising to his feet, the color draining from his face. What a What a surprise. Marcus shut the door behind him. Cut the crap, David. We need to talk. David nodded, instantly nervous. Of course, whatever you need. Marcus crossed his arms, eyes locked on him. You know what's happening at your front desk? David blinked. I think everything is... Wrong answer. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was steady, low, and lethal. I just had my reservation deleted. By Becky. On purpose. David paled. She did what? Don't act shocked. Marcus stepped closer. You've had complaints for months. Guests reporting mistreatment, discrimination. Her name is all over it. David looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. I thought maybe she just needed more training. Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. Training? David, this woman isn't confused. She's malicious, and you've let her get away with it. The silence in the room grew thick. Marcus pointed to the lobby with a tilt of his head. You're going to walk out there and fire her. Right now. In front of everyone. David's eyes widened. What? Now? Now. For a long moment, David didn't move. Then slowly he nodded. Because there was no other option. 2 minutes later, Marcus stood just off to the side of the lobby, arms folded, as David approached the front desk. Becky looked up, confused at first, then wary. She straightened, clearly sensing something was off. Becky, David began, voice shaking slightly. I need to speak with you. Effective immediately, your employment with the Crown is terminated. Her jaw dropped. What? Wait, what are you talking about? You deleted a guest reservation without authorization. This isn't the first complaint we've had. It's over. Becky's eyes darted to Marcus, then back to David. It was a mistake. I didn't mean to. It wasn't a mistake, Marcus said quietly, stepping forward. Becky froze. For the first time, realization flickered in her eyes. You, she whispered. You're... He gave her a slow, knowing nod. She turned red, then pale, then red again. I didn't know. I didn't mean. You didn't need to know, Marcus said. You just needed to treat people right. And with that, Becky grabbed her things and stormed out of the hotel, not even bothering to look back. Justice, swift and public, just the way it needed to be. The lobby was buzzing now, quietly but unmistakably. Guests whispered behind newspapers and coffee mugs, staff exchanged nervous glances, and somewhere near the elevators, a bellhop was definitely texting someone the moment the drama unfolded. But Marcus wasn't there for theatrics. This wasn't about a scene, it was about sending a message. He walked back to the front desk, calm as ever, and leaned slightly over the counter. The remaining staff, 2 clerks in their 20s, wide-eyed and frozen, looked like they just witnessed a tornado tear through their shift. Listen up, Marcus said evenly, scanning their faces. Things are about to change around here. Fast. The younger of the two, a guy with neatly parted hair and a tie just slightly too tight, swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Do you work for corporate? Marcus smiled, not unkindly. Something like that. Then he reached for the landline behind the desk, punched in a direct line number, and waited as the call connected. This is Reynolds, he said when the click came through. Shut down the Crown at Midtown for a full internal audit, effective immediately. I want every guest complaint from the last 6 months pulled. Any open cases flagged. Every employee evaluated thoroughly. If they can't meet our standards, they're gone. Comp every guest who filed a complaint and give them VIP status on their next stay. He hung up before the person on the other end could respond. Silence. The clerks blinked like they were still trying to process what just happened. One of them slowly looked toward the nameplate on the wall behind the front desk. Marcus D. Reynolds, founder and CEO. And then it hit them. You're that Marcus Reynolds? The young woman asked, eyes wide as saucers. Marcus gave a single nod. The silence thickened. Even the jazz music in the lobby seemed to fade. Across the room, David Whitmore reappeared, sweat still clinging to his forehead. "Mr. Reynolds," he stammered, "I handled the situation." Marcus didn't even look at him. "No, David, I handled it. You just stood there looking like you needed a bathroom break." David let out a weak chuckle, hoping it was a joke. It wasn't. "You realize I could fire you right now?" Marcus added, his tone casual, almost polite. David stiffened. "Please, sir, I swear I'll make things right." Marcus finally turned to face him. "No, David, I'll make things right." He brushed past him, heading toward the elevators once more. The message had been sent, the fear had landed, and the cleanup had officially begun. In less than 10 minutes, Marcus had done what an entire management team failed to do in months. Not just remove the rot, but take back the reins of a brand he built with purpose, pride, and integrity. And every single person in that lobby, they'd never forget who he was again. Marcus sat still for a long moment after the door clicked shut behind David. The silence in the suite was thick, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that came after necessary confrontation, the kind that followed hard truths. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't angry. He was focused. This wasn't about one bad employee or one weak manager. It was about the standard. He reopened his laptop and pulled up a list of every guest complaint logged at the Crown at Midtown in the last 6 months. There were over 100, but Marcus wasn't scanning for volume. He was looking for patterns. And there they were. Repeated claims of being ignored at check-in. Rooms mysteriously unavailable for Black or Latino guests. Accidental reservation errors. Cold, dismissive customer service depending on the color of your skin. This wasn't sloppy hospitality. This was systemic bias. And worse, it had been tolerated. Marcus clicked through each case, one by one, reading every word. Some guests had been seasoned travelers. Some were families on vacation. A few were first-time guests who'd saved for months to enjoy one special night, and all of them had left feeling less than welcome. He made a list of every guest who had filed a formal complaint. Then he drafted a personal message for each one, not some copy-paste PR apology, but a real note from the desk of Marcus Reynolds. Along with each letter came full refunds, complimentary return stays, and upgraded VIP status for future visits. Because in his house, respect wasn't optional, it was policy. Next, he opened the employee files. Becky had been handled, David too. But this went deeper. 3 other front desk staff had similar complaints on file, subtle things, but Marcus had learned long ago that racism didn't always wear a sign. Sometimes it wore a smile. Sometimes it hid behind company policy and "we're at capacity" and "sorry, the system's down." He flagged those names for review. Not termination yet, but evaluation under a zero-tolerance lens, because second chances didn't come at the cost of someone else's dignity. Then he clicked into the management dashboard and initiated something the Reynolds Group had never done before at this scale, a bias and accountability audit. Every single hotel in the chain, from Miami to Seattle, would be reviewed. Every manager evaluated. Every complaint reopened. Not as a scare tactic, as a wake-up call. From this point forward, no one in the company would be able to say, "I didn't know." Not about the expectations, not about the consequences. Marcus leaned back and took a sip of cold water. His phone buzzed again. Regional managers, board members, media inquiries. Let them wait. He had something more important to finish, because he didn't build an empire so people could be made to feel small inside it. And negligence? That wasn't just a crack in the foundation. It was a threat to everything he stood for. The city skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus's suite, lights flickering like stars pulled down to earth. He stood there quietly, hands in his pockets, watching the night breathe. Inside the hotel, the noise had died down. Staff had returned to their duties. Guests had gone back to their rooms, but nothing was the same. Not anymore. What happened today wasn't just a correction, it was a reset. Marcus hadn't come here looking for a fight. He hadn't come to make an example. But when the line between hospitality and humiliation got crossed, when the very values he built this empire on were trampled, he had no choice. Because it was never just about luxury, it was about dignity. This wasn't the first time he'd been dismissed, judged, silently written off. He'd built a life learning to navigate rooms where people assumed he didn't belong until he owned the building. And still, even after everything, the same silent rules lingered. But not anymore. Not on his watch. He turned back toward the desk and looked over the letters he'd written, the audits he'd launched, the system now in motion. Justice wasn't just served today, it was institutionalized. The message was clear. If you worked for the Reynolds Group, you served every guest with respect. No exceptions, no excuses, and if you couldn't, you didn't work here anymore. Marcus picked up the framed photo on the desk, an old picture of him and his mother, taken outside a rundown motel they could barely afford when he was 12. She had smiled that day, holding his hand, telling him, "One day, baby, you'll build a place where people like us don't get treated like ghosts." He had, and tonight, he'd defended it. As he shut down his laptop and dimmed the lights, Marcus felt the weight of the day settle into something steadier. Something like pride, something like peace. He hadn't just reclaimed a hotel, he'd reclaimed the vision. And from now on, no one would ever forget who Marcus Reynolds was. Not because of his wealth, not because of his name on the building, but because he made damn sure no one else got treated like they didn't belong in a place they helped build.